So I raised this question about ideology in part because it's a specific version of a much more general and much more pervasive problem, which is controversies by definition are disputes extended in time. So in order for a controversy to occur, it has to persist. And the question of why this controversy persists is a good one, and it's an important historical question. The ideology thesis is one possible reason why the controversy could have persisted. But it's not necessarily our last answer to that question.
And does it persist to this day?
Well, that's one of the questions maybe we'll get to, and hopefully this afternoon we'll get a better idea of exactly what kinds of reasons there are for this persistence.
If it persists.
Well, even up and through the 80s, at least to that point, we can say the controversy persisted long enough to be very noticeable.
Mike, when you're talking about ideology there, are you talking about the issues that Dick was just discussing?
Yeah, so Dick's thesis is, the ideology thesis is one possible explanation for the persistence of this controversy, and one that would be recognized as applicable widely in a number of different controversies, but it's not necessarily the only explanation. That's my point.
So are there other general explanations that you just want to toss out? I mean, if you've got the general
And poison the well, as it were? No, I'd rather let the conversation evolve and see what explanations a group of mostly philosophers comes to about what explanations they think there are for the persistence of a controversy by the end of the day.
Can you articulate better the ideological theory of the persistence of the controversy? Because I still don't understand Dr. Maureen's point of what the relationship between Crow being a conservative and him pushing neutral theory. I don't understand that.
So the classical view is a view that says you're mostly homozygous on average. The balanced view says you're mostly heterozygous or variable, or there's a large proportion. And it's a relative frequency controversy. They're debating relative proportions of these kinds of things. If you're maintaining the status quo, then you think that evolution, through a long process of adaptation, has sculpted those homozygotes to be the best they could be. It has optimized. And so why would you want to change from that?
And that's where eugenics came out of. I mean, we already have the optimal genotype, and all genetic variation is bad. And moreover, it changes your view about, if you believe that individuals are mostly homozygotes, as Muller and Crow believed, then it changes your attitude about the manifest genetic differences between human groups. Now the differences between groups are large as compared to the variation within groups, and that has tremendous political implications.
But it doesn't mean that Crow was a big advocate of the neutral theory in the early days. When I first went to Michigan in 1988, Kimura was wondering whether Crow was really supporting the neutral theory or not. And Crow was very much a selectionist and was very skeptical of the neutral theory, and he changed Moto's books and papers to read junk DNA. He renamed that DNA as junk DNA.
Sure.
And later, Moto was very upset by that. He said, no, 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 I'm not the king of junk DNA. I'm the king of the DNA.
Will, when was this time when Jim was a selectionist?
All
No. Give me some dates.
From the time he is a student right through the time of the neutral theories, he's really talking about what's important for selection, and that's what really counts, and the neutral stuff is nothing but a bunch
I'm
of
sorry.
junk.
I've asked the wrong question. Not whether he was a neutralist. At what time was Jim a balance theorist?
Oh, I'm never.
Never. Look, Temin and Crow paper. When was the Temin and Crow paper? Remember, what I want to say to those who are not in the know, there were a series of experiments done by the Dubzhansky school measuring genetic variation and the average dominance of deleterious genes.
69.
And well, that would be one of them. It's around, all right, late 60s. And then there was the Mulleroid school, which claimed that in fact the amount of variation was due to rare deleterious mutations, which were on the average semi-dominant. That is to say that the mutations, the deleterious mutations, had a slightly dominant effect in heterozygotes, so that they were unconditionally bad, whereas the Dobzhansky school kept saying, no, no, what appears as deleterious in homozygous condition is superior in heterozygous condition. And that struggle went on the experimental level. The same experiment, exactly the same experiments were done in Columbia and in Indiana and in Madison with exactly opposite results. Or not exactly, but with opposite results. So that struggle was a very old one, which was not the neutralist struggle, but the. So Dobzhansky and his children were the neutralists, whereas Muller and his children were the not neutralists, were the balanced people, and Muller and his children were the purifying selection people.
Just do Jessica.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, can I say one other thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Dobzhansky, because this illustrates what historians have to be very careful of. Dobzhansky often wrote, constructed experiments, got the protocol, enlisted the person to do the experiment, had the experimental work analyzed statistically by Howard Levine, who was his captive statistician, and wrote the paper, but didn't put his name on the paper. And Dobzhansky would often say, a good professor has written many more papers than he has his name on. Now that sounds like an extraordinary reversal of the Matthew effect, where instead of trying to take credit for it, he's giving away credit for things, work he actually did. But this was a very clever ploy on the part of a man who understood the dynamics of schools of thought. Namely, if he could get a lot of papers in the literature which did not have his name on it, which were done by other people, which had results that agreed with him, that would increase the credibility of his view. And so what he did was he created a literature without his own name as a way of showing that, and I don't know whether Muller ever did that, but there certainly were papers, the paper of Ralphie Falk,
They
the
always
Crow.
had his name on it,
They always had Muller's name on it?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that just showed that Dobzhansky had a better political sense than Herman Muller.
That's right.
I think that's important to understand. So as historians, don't take the names on papers, not just the order, but who even appears on the paper as too serious unless you look behind and see where it was done and what the motivations were and who was cited and so on.
Jessica?
Yeah, I was just going back to a little earlier. I mean, I think you can see evidence of, I don't know whether I want to call it an ideology, but this idea that organisms are already optimized in Ota's paper, which is a later development of the nearly neutral theory, because she argues, that it's more likely that they're slightly deleterious than they are slightly advantageous. And the only argument one could see for this is that we've already got the optimal.
Well, that,
Right?
so my view is that it's not, you can't call the neutral theory just neoclassical, right? So Dick makes a very strong claim in his paper. He says to call it the neutral theory obscures the origins of it. And my claim was to call it neoclassical obscures the origins of it.
Or at least half of the origin.
But that neoclassical tradition continues through it. I mean, that is definitely there, but you have to also take into account that there's also this biochemical tradition that's feeding into it as well. So they're not mutually exclusive
Nobody disagrees with that.
categories at all.
That's a very
But do you see that, but it's discontinuous, the debate with the Dobzhansky and the neutral debate. It's just, you see the same pattern in both debates, but are you assuming that there's some continuity between these debates?
Yes, I'm assuming that
And that's what you're arguing against.
No, he's not. He's saying there's another element that comes in from the Jukes-King
Yeah,
side
that helps
in which
produce that
biochemical
response.
arguments are primary. That my claim was an incomplete one, in that I only looked at the
Yeah.
population genetic origins and not the biochemical origins.
And that explains,
And that's
I mean,
true.
there's continuities, but there's also, something produces that difference, that transformation. And it has to be the biochemical data.